Good deal. Thanks, Glenn. First, I want to thank Glenn for asking me to do this. It's always an honor, privilege to be asked to do anything. I pray to God that I do justice to the men and women of Alcoholics Anonymous who spent countless hours helping me to understand and to carry the message of AA. I'm actually, I currently live in Texas. I'm not from Texas. I was actually born and raised in Southern California. I moved out to Texas about 22 years ago. And I had typical childhood. I grew up in a upper middle class family. Mom and dad happily married, got 3 brothers, and I started noticing early on that there was something real different about me. And I wish I knew then what I know today. Oddly enough, I grew up really loving God. I at a really young age, had made the decision to become a Jesuit priest after an encounter with some Jesuit missionaries. I went to Catholic school from 1st grade through 8th grade, and it was just an awesome experience. But I noticed something really bizarre started happening in my very early teens, and my skills and ability to commit crime far outweighed my moral compass. And I found myself doing things that I know I shouldn't be doing, but went ahead and did it anyways. And by the time I caught my first breaking and entering gun charge at the age of 13. And the way I was living my life had pretty much killed every dream I'd ever had. And I struggled for a few years, went to some therapy, couldn't find a solution. But at the age of 15, something really awesome happened to me. And I went from Catholic schools, wearing Catholic school uniforms and doing Catholic school things, to going to a public high school, which was a real jarring kind of social experiment. My high school had 4,000 people, and I thought I really felt alone before in my life. My first day of high school, I never felt so alone in my whole life. I didn't know where I belonged. You got the jocks, the rah-rahs, the eggheads. You've got all these different cliques. And being in Southern California, there was the surf crowd. And these guys smoked a lot of pot, surfed every day. My dad was born and raised in Hawaii. So naturally, I was a surfer. I actually learned to surf before I could swim. And surfers smoke a lot of pot. And I started smoking pot at an early age. So I started hanging out with them, and we had these commonalities. But man, I still didn't fit in. And my sophomore year in high school, one of the coolest guys in my school, Tom, his parents, when he turned 16, had bought him a Volkswagen microbus. And he invited me and Matt and Steve, the 3 coolest guys in my school, to go to the drive-in movie theater with him. And I thought I'd arrived. And on our way to Highway 39, which was this huge drive-in movie theater, on our way there, we pimped some Mickey Big Mouth malt liquor. And I drank 4 Mickey Big Mouths in about, 45 minutes. And I had my very first spiritual experience. I didn't know what life could be like until I drank. And it's interesting. I hear a lot of people talk about the 9-step promises, even though it says, are these extravagant promises? We think not. Today, I understand that those 9-step promises aren't extravagant promises, because I experienced every single one of them when I was drinking. And if you put a little simple phrase in all these, in front of all these things that they call promises, are actually mile markers for the 9th step. When I was drinking, I knew a new freedom and a new happiness. When I was drinking, I didn't regret the past nor to shut the door. When I was drinking, I comprehended the word serenity and I knew peace. When I was drinking, it didn't matter how far down the scale I went. When I was drinking, the feeling of uselessness disappeared. When I was drinking, I lost fear of people with economic insecurity. When I was drinking, I intuitively knew how to handle situations that used to baffle me. And I suddenly realized that alcohol was doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. And alcohol was not my problem, it was actually my solution. And that was really difficult because all the people in my life, they kept pointing at the alcohol saying, this is your problem. This is what's wrong with you. And if you just stop drinking, everything will be okay. And that wasn't the case for me. There's that paragraph on the bottom of page 82 where it compares the alcoholic to a tornado. It says that the alcoholic is like a tornado rolling its way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken, relationships are dead, affections are uprooted, selfish, inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. And then there's this line that says that we feel a man is unthinking when he says sobriety is enough. And that was really difficult because when I got to AA, I got sober at the age of 22 in 1988. And people just kept telling me, just don't drink no matter what. And I was just not drinking no matter what. And my life was getting worse. And it talks about, he's like the farmer who comes up out of a cyclone cellar to find his home ruined. And to his wife, he remarks, don't see at anything the matter here, Ma, ain't it grand the wind stopped blowing. And that was my experience, that my not drinking was, my stopping drinking wasn't enough, that I have all this wreckage and I got to do something about it. And I came into AA through the doors of a treatment center. My drinking took me to places that I might not have taken you. At the age of 21, I was drinking so hard and heavy, and all the people that loved me had tried everything that they could do. And my mom used to talk with me with her tear-stained cheeks and plead with me not to do what I'm doing. And she would say things like, if you love me, you would stop. And the thing that I really couldn't express to her at the time was, this is me trying to not drink. I don't want to do the things that I'm doing, but I just can't stop, and I don't know why. And rather than my mom see my demise, I wound up on 5th and San Pedro in Los Angeles, and I spent about 10 months drinking on Skid Row because I didn't want anybody who loved me to have to watch me die. And through a series of bad breaks and misunderstandings, I caught a new case, and I was looking at doing 96 months for some crimes that I was committing. And through basically through the Hughes Act in the 70s, I was offered treatment center and a year and a halfway house in lieu of prison time. And I am not super smart, but if you offer me treatment center and a halfway house or 96 months of prison time, I'm gonna do treatment and a halfway house. Anything to avoid gladiator school. And so I came into AA through the doors of a treatment center at the age of 22. That's where I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. They had a 6:30 a.m. meeting every morning, and we had to shuffle ourselves in there. And I had put myself in a position where I was beyond human aid. People could not help me. And I thought for sure that this hospital and Alcoholics Anonymous was going to be the solution to what I suffer from. And it was strange because in the hospital, they didn't tell me the difference between the 12 steps they were working, the 12 steps of AA, counselors, sponsors, groups, AA meetings. I didn't know the difference. I kind of just pushed it all together and thought everything was the same. And when they told me to leave, when I left treatment, they told me to get a sponsor. Nobody explained what a sponsor was. And they said, find somebody who's got what you want. And I started going to meetings when I got into my halfway house, and there was this guy there, 8 years sober. He had a car, a job, a place to live, and he was a realtor. And I thought, well, that looks good. I'll ask this guy. So I asked him to be my sponsor. And we literally went through the first 3 steps in less than 5 minutes. He asked me if I was powerless over alcohol, if my life was unmanageable. And I'm like, well, absolutely. I can't stop drinking, and I'm living in a halfway house, so I don't go to prison. He asked me if I believed in God, and he didn't ask me any other question. Well, yes, I do. I was going to be a priest. He asked me if I wanted to turn my life over to God, and I said, sure, that sounds like a good idea. Let's do that. And then he had me write these inventories. And these inventories were on these mimeograph sheets. To any millennials that are on this Zoom call, a mimeograph sheet isn't something you pull off a printer. It's actually this piece of paper that has this kind of blue mimeograph ink on it. And the people from my generation will remember this. We used to smell them because it smelled like ammonia, right? And the thing was, these mimeograph sheets were from a treatment center that rhymes with Hazelden. And I wound up filling out all these sheets. And I read them to him. I read them to my sponsor before the Thursday night fights meeting in Seal Beach. Took me about, I don't know, a half hour. And he said, okay, awesome. You're done with the steps. Go to meetings. So here I am, this new guy, thinking that I've done the steps, going to meetings, and I'm getting worse. I got to tell you, it was really fun in the early days of my sobriety, because my being sober was like a normal person being drunk. I hadn't been sober. And it was really fun to go to sober dances and go to Denny's till 3 in the morning and go to meetings. But after a little while, the novelty of this was wearing off. I'm starting to go to Denny's and I'm getting resentful at these people. They're telling these stories for the umpteenth time, and I was there, and they're not even telling the story right. And I'm just getting the worst going to 7-Eleven meetings a week because I was told that meeting makers make it. And I had to stay sober a year to get my record sealed. And I stayed sober for a year. And I wasn't going to be rude. I called my sponsor up, and I met him. I met him in a meeting. I said, hey, I want to thank you for your time, but obviously Alcoholics Anonymous isn't working for me. I'm getting worse, and I'm either going to eat a bullet or drink again. And I'd rather take my chances on the streets, because I'm great at living on the streets. And I'm really glad that my sponsor didn't say, Chris, you did it wrong, or what's wrong with you. He had told me point blank that he had known for a long time that I needed more than what he had to offer. And he gave me the name and address of a meeting in South Central Los Angeles. And he said, Chris, please give AA one more shot. And I don't know why, but I went. Anybody familiar with Los Angeles knows that Asian guys don't go hanging out in Compton unless they own the liquor store. But that's where I went. I don't know why, but I went to that meeting and I heard a very different Alcoholics Anonymous. I heard people talking in a way that I wasn't hearing in the meetings that I was going to. And through a series of events, I found myself sitting in front of this man named Joe Hoff. And I wound up asking Joe to be my sponsor, and I found out what a sponsor really was, like it describes on page 18 and working with others on page 97. This guy, he actually, my very first meeting with him was about 90 minutes, and I learned more about Alcoholics Anonymous in that 90 minutes than I did my first year of going to over 1,000 meetings. And he showed me that Alcoholics Anonymous isn't a meeting, that Alcoholics Anonymous is actually a book, like it talks about on the title page. Alcoholics Anonymous is the story contained in the first 164 pages of how these 1,000 men and women have recovered from alcoholism. And that the meetings, it describes this in Forward to the Second Edition, the meetings actually got their name from the book. Alcoholics Anonymous is actually a book. And Joe took me on this journey through the 12 steps as prescribed in the big book. word by word. If I didn't understand a word, he'd have me look it up in a dictionary from 1939, because definitions definitely have changed. If there was an instruction, I did it. If there was a question, I answered it. And through this, I really started to see that I had never done the steps before. And he actually, through his guidance, taking me through the big book, I actually began to see what the steps were. And it was really interesting because it answered a lot of lifelong questions that I couldn't answer before. Today, I understand what makes me alcoholic. And the first step is broken up. Actually, you know what? I should probably talk about this. So on page 18, it compares alcoholics in the disease of alcoholism to cancer. So my dad died of cancer some 25 years ago. And when you have cancer, the first thing you got to do is get a diagnosis. After you get a diagnosis, the doctor's going to give you a solution. My dad had to go through chemotherapy and radiation. He had to do this radical surgery. And then he had to do this other round of radiation and some blood washing stuff. And the solution that they had was very aggressive. And they told my dad, if you could die in the treatment process, but if you survive it, you will live a relatively normal life. But if you don't do this, you're going to be dead in a few months. And my dad had to make the decision on whether or not he wanted to go through with the process or take his chances. And that's exactly the process that happens in Alcoholics Anonymous in the 12 steps. The first step is a diagnosis. It's a self-diagnosis. The second step is the solution. I've got to come to believe that the power greater myself is going to restore me to sanity. Step 3, I get to make a decision. And if I want to go through with it, then steps 4 through 12 are the action steps that lead me to recover. And I thought my being alcoholic was tied to my consequences. To find out that in the first 45 pages of the big book, it describes what's wrong with me. And it's broken up into 3 parts. And there's actually 2 halves. The first half is admitting that I'm powerless. And the second half, after the dash, is that I have this unmanageability in my life. And it's weird because when I read the first step, I used to look at it, I thought it said that I got to admit that I'm powerless over alcohol, and that's why my life is unmanageable. But that's not what it says. It says I've got to admit that I'm powerless over alcohol, and then there's a dash. A dash means end of thought, start a thought. And that I have this unmanageability in my life, not this unmanageability when it comes to my drinking. And the first half, being powerless, is broken up into 2 more halves. From the doctor's opinion to page 23 is all about how am I powerless physically. And I've been going to therapy for a long time prior to my going to treatment, and everybody always pointed at the alcohol, saying if you stop this, everything will be okay. And I stopped, and it just got worse, to find out that, man, what makes me alcoholic is what Dr. Silkworth talks about. I think on XXVI. So the doctor's opinion has 2 basic letters that Silkworth wrote for Alcoholics Anonymous. And in between those 2 letters, there's this narrative. And in this narrative, it talks about the doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, our opinion and absolute soundness may, of course, mean little. But as ex-problem drinkers, we can say as the explanation makes good sense. It explains many things that we couldn't otherwise account. And I am a layperson when it comes to this. I'm not a doctor. But the allergy theory makes sense. That he goes on to describe that, that we have this physical craving. When we start to drink, our body physically craves more. And an allergy, by definition, is an abnormal reaction to a common substance. In alcohol, is pretty common. I could walk over to the corner store right now and buy enough booze to kill all of us. It's common. It's everywhere. And I do not react to alcohol like normal people. I'm allergic to it. And when I start to drink it, my body develops this phenomenon of craving where I'm no longer the same guy that was sitting before you before I had that drink. Now I have this craving, and I can't tell you where I'm going to stop. I can't regulate. I can't control when I'm going to stop. And there were times where I could stop right where I wanted after 3, 4, 5, 10, 12. But what started happening at the end of my drinking was once I started, somebody usually had to physically stop me from consuming alcohol. And that's not the experience of normal people. I've got this brother who's normal. And actually, I got these two brothers. I'll share this story. My wife and I, who's also sober, we went back to California to visit family and hang out. We went to this restaurant one night, super crowded. They gave us one of those little pagers to tell us when our table was ready. And my little brother was standing here. My older brother was standing right here. And my little brother leans over and says to my older brother, "Hey, I'm going to go to the bar and grab a beer. Do you want one?" And I'm really curious to kind of see what happens. Normal people fascinate me, right? And my older brother sits there and he thinks for a second. He goes, "You know what? Let's split a beer." And these two asshole grown men buy a beer and they split it. They split a beer. To me, that's alcohol abuse. I don't understand why people do that. That's all they had. They sipped this beer and it was over. And that's what normal people do. They know where they want to get to. They hit the target and they stop. Me, I start drinking and my target starts moving around. I've had experiences where I got to behave myself. So I'm only going to have a couple of cocktails, and those 3 cocktails get me so drunk, I got to go outside and smoke a cigarette before I make an ass out of myself. And then there's other times where I didn't drive, we're going to a party, and tonight's the night I get hammered and I drink 15 cocktails and I can't get buzzed. I can't hit my mark because it's all over the place. So today I understand this doctor's theory that we have an allergy, and it explains many things that I couldn't otherwise explain. It explains why I wouldn't show up, or I would break my promise, or I wouldn't do what I said I was going to do. It's not because I'm a bad person trying to get good. It's because I suffer from this allergy. When I start drinking, I can't stop. And it's beyond any kind of mental control. And my sponsor, I covered it for the first time. I identified that describes what my drinking looks like. But it's interesting because I have an allergy to scallops. I can eat all kinds of shellfish, crab, lobster, clams, mussels, but if I eat a scallop, I'm going to wind up in the hospital. And you know what I don't eat? I don't eat scallops. Why? Because I know I'm allergic to it. That's where the second half of the first step comes in, and it actually switches gears on page 23. Very top of the page, it talks about these observations around the allergy are academic and pointless if our friend never takes the first drink again. It's academic because it was good to understand this allergy, but it's pointless because if I never take another first drink again, I will never ever experience the allergy again. And page 23 goes on to say that therefore the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body. And I've got this mental powerlessness, which it describes page 23 to page 43, and that I suffer from these obsessions, these persistent, disturbing preoccupations with this unreasonable idea when it comes to drinking. And it is totally unreasonable for a guy like me to pick up a drink, because I've had so many consequences surrounding my drinking that it's insane. And insanity, they talk about on page 37, isn't doing the same thing over again, expecting a different result. Insanity is described in the big book as a lack of apportionability to think straight. That when it comes to alcohol, I can't rely on my logic and reason, that I can't not drink. And that idea of insanity is doing the same thing, expecting a different result, that the guy who said that was actually Albert Einstein, and it would be insane for him to rewrite out a quantum physics equation, which is a very finite math, and to think that it's going to come out differently, because it's not. But when it comes to alcoholism, that's not there. I mean, how many people have I met who have come to AA and have drank again and come back to AA? I don't tell them, "What are you, insane? Leave. You already tried AA. It's not going to work for you." Sometimes the most sane thing an alcoholic can do is the same thing over again, praying for a different result. I tend to stick to the definition of insanity the big book gives, that I do not have the ability to think straight. And that explains why I can't use my brain to keep me drunk. I've had every need, necessity, and wish to not pick up a drink and picked up a drink. It's because I can't rely on my brain. And when I understood what makes me powerless, I can't control the start because I have these obsessions. I can't control the stop because I have this allergy. I understand what makes me powerless, but why? Well, page 44 and 45 describes the manageability of my life, not of my drinking. It describes this: if a mere code of morals, a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, the disease, many of us would have recovered long ago. Hell, I was raised from a very young age to know there was right, wrong, good, bad, truth, lies, what a good person does, what a bad person does. But by the age of 13, I couldn't pull that stuff off. Why? And I could try and will these things with all my might, but the needed power isn't there. And page 45 describes to me how lack of power is my dilemma, that I don't have the power to do the next right thing, to be a good person. And if lack of power is the problem, getting power is the solution. And the rest of the chapter, We Agnostics, describes this solution. That it's really interesting because I thought We Agnostics was all about taking the atheist and the agnostic and making them a true believer and going into my broken relationship with God from my childhood and fixing that. And that's not at all what the chapter We Agnostics is about. It's interesting because when you dissect it, We Agnostics is actually about taking the atheist and the true believer and making them agnostic. Because agnostic, by definition, is a person who will not commit to an idea of God. And the chapter is We Agnostics. That's what we're supposed to be, not we used to be agnostic or we were once agnostic and we did what was in this book and we're true believers now. It's actually about, it describes we need to have an agnostic temperament. And it wasn't about fixing my broken relationship with God. The process in We Agnostics, it's interesting because in therapy, my psychiatrist always used to say, Chris, you keep looking out the window, you got to look in the mirror. And what Alcoholics Anonymous, what the big book was actually doing is it had me stop looking out the window. Stop looking in the mirror and started looking out the window. How I came to believe in the power of great myself that's going to restore me to sanity so I don't pick up the first drink was by looking at all these people in Alcoholics Anonymous who have been where I've been, who've done what I've done and worse. And not only do they not drink, but they live these happy and sustainably productive lives that I could never pull off. And I came to believe in Alcoholics Anonymous by doing what it talks about on page 52. It says, when we saw others solve their problems by the simple reliance on the Spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the idea of God. I came to believe in AA the same way I came to believe in alcohol. Growing up, I saw people drinking, my brothers, my friends, families, even strangers. And when they drank, they had fun. And I came to believe that if I drink, I too will have fun. And so at the age of 15 on Highway 39, I took some action and I drank and I got results. And I took action and it got results. And I took some more drinking action and I got some more results. And it's the same thing in Alcoholics Anonymous. I see these people who are getting results from these 12 steps and I take some action and I get results. And I take some action, I get results. I started to see that coming to believe in a power greater than myself is the exact same thing when it came to coming to believe in the power of alcohol. Taking action to get results. And I came to believe in a power greater than myself, restoring me to sanity by just following directions that what's described in the chapter We Agnostics. And I come up to this decision in step 3. And it's interesting because I really didn't understand this decision the first time I made it. And when I went through the book, when I went through the prescribed steps in the big book with my sponsor, it actually tells me what this is all about on page 63. And it's weird because I would go to meetings and I'd hear people with 8 years sober share, I don't know how it works. And I used to be baffled by that. You're 8 years sober and you don't know how it works. Hell, I'm brand new, and there's a chapter on how it works. What the hell are you talking? This false humility was really getting to me. And page 63 actually says this is the how and why of it. How, first of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. That's how we do it. We quit playing God, right? Why? Because it says it didn't work. How we do this is by quitting playing God. Why? Because playing God doesn't work. Two short sentences describes the how and why of it. And that bottom paragraph goes on and says, next we decided. Here's the third step decision. From hereafter in this drama life, God's going to be the director. So what do actors do from director? We ask direction. He is the principal, we are his agents. A principal is the boss. An agent is the guy who acts on behalf of the one with power, and he is the father and we are his children. So I'm going to trust him. So the third step decision described in the book's really easy. I'm going to seek direction from the guy in charge that I trust. And all it is a decision, though. I mean, hell, I make lots of decisions every day. I made a decision yesterday to clean off my workspace in my office at home, and it's still a mess, right? Unless I follow up the decision with some action, a decision is just a decision. So the top page 63 talks about when we sincerely take such a position, all sorts of remarkable things happen. And then it talks about on the bottom page 63, next we launch out on a course of vigorous action. And this course of vigorous action is the remainder of the steps. And the first thing I got to do is I've got to identify the things that are blocking me from God. It talks about on page 64 that this inventory process is the beginning of facing and getting rid of the things that are blocking me. Blocking me from what? This relationship with the power greater myself that allows me to sit here sober. And I identify the blocks through inventory, and I remove them through the process of making amends. And it's weird because the meetings I used to attend in California, people used to, I love writing inventory. I write inventory after 12 to 18 months, and I love making amends. I love everything about the program. When I moved to Texas, it was strange because I'd hear people talk about dreading inventory and how long it takes and what a big pain in the butt it is and how they don't want to make amends. And it horrifies me because what's happening is these new people are hearing about how hard inventory is and how bad it is, and how long it's taking. And then when they get to inventory, they hate writing inventory and they share how they hate inventory, and new people hear that. And all we're doing is growing crops of people who hate the very program we're supposed to embrace and love. And it's the message we're supposed to be carrying. I love writing it. And it's interesting because every time I talk to these people about why they hate inventory, it turns out they're not writing AA's inventories. They're writing out somebody else's versions. And I was taught to write the inventories this book describes, because if I don't find, page 29 says, further on clear-cut directions are giving showing how to recover. If I change the directions for inventory, can I expect to get the same spiritual awakening that I got had I followed it? It's like if you're making a cake. I went over to this friend's house one time. He was making this chocolate cake, and I'm not a chocolate cake dessert guy. I'd rather eat fried cheese, but that's what he was making. And when he was done with it, he offered me a piece, and it was the best chocolate cake I've ever eaten in my life. And I asked him for the recipe. He wrote down the directions, right? So later on, I was going to make this cake, and if I change the directions, so it talks about 3 eggs. I don't like egg yolk, so I put in 4 egg whites, makes the volume about the same. I'm not a big fan of flour, so instead of 3 cups of flour, 2 cups of sugar, I put in 4 cups of sugar and 2 cups of flour. It says a bag of chocolate chips. I really like chocolate, so I had 3 bags of chocolate chips. And instead of cooking the cake for 40 minutes at 350 degrees, I'm in a hurry, so I broil it for 15 minutes. If I take the cake out of the oven after changing the directions, can I expect to get the same cake? Absolutely not. And I always point out to people who show me their inventories, and it looks nothing like it does on page 65. Page 65 even says our inventory, our example is usually as definite as this. If your inventory doesn't look like it does on page 65, you're no longer doing Alcoholics Anonymous 4-step. And it's amazing when I follow directions how simple and easy inventory became. And I loved the process. And doing the 3 inventories around resentment, fear, and sex, the 3 common manifestations of self, man, when I follow directions, it's a super easy process. And I take this inventory that has my grosser handicaps and the nature of my wrongs, not my deep, dark secrets, not the things I don't want to tell anybody. I actually went past that and started looking at why I did what I did. Hell, I don't even want to know my own deep, dark secrets. I sure as hell don't want to hear Glenn's. I don't care about that. I want to know about the nature of why I did what I did. And that's what I get when I follow directions. I'm looking for my faults, my blames, my mistakes, not the skeevy things that I did that I'm going to take to the grave. And I think that was my biggest concern about the 5th step, is because I thought I had to share with you all these dark things that I don't even want to remember doing. But that's not what I'm sharing. And in the 5th step, I get to let this stuff in. I get to admit this stuff, to guide myself into another human being. And it was interesting because where I come from, we follow directions out of the book. And in the book, it says we share this inventory with person or persons. I was raised in Alcoholics Anonymous to read this inventory to persons. And it even says I can share my wife, best friend, spiritual advisor. I share my wife every year with I share my inventory with my wife every year. And it's interesting because if I read it to just one person and then I go out to make amends, I'm still super nervous about all this stuff that I've done. Last year when I wrote inventory, I read it to 13 people in total. And people are like, why would you do that? Because I wanted to become really familiar with the information. After I read it once, the nerves kind of calmed down, and I share it again, and I share it again, and I share it again. By the time I got to my amends process, I was so familiar with what was in my inventory, I got to enjoy making amends to people. Imagine that, right? I had this one guy say, you can't share inventory with your wife. I'm like, well, one, you're grammatically incorrect, because I already have done that multiple times. So I can make amends to my wife, and I actually follow directions. It says in there that I can't share anything with her that's going to hurt her. I share that with somebody else who'd be unaffected, but I can share this. If my wife, I've heard people say you got to keep your program separate, but I thought I'm supposed to practice these principles in all my affairs. And if this program is the most important program in my life, which is leading me to this spiritual awakening, to this relationship with God that is the most important spiritual connection I have, why wouldn't I share it with the person who's most important in my life, my wife? And I really wish sometimes people would just share where they're really coming from, and that is, I'm scared to share this with my wife, even though the big book says I can. And that would clarify a lot of this for new people. And it's interesting because our job is to pull newcomers forward with a vision of hope. And that's what we're supposed to be sharing in meetings. And 6 and 7 is just these checkpoints of, am I ready? It doesn't matter if I'm willing. Not being opposed to in mind is good, but if I don't have the will to do this, I ask until it comes. 6 and 7 constantly says, are you ready? In fit condition for immediate use. Do I have the inventories I need to be able to go out and clean up the wreckage of my past? And in the 7th step, the prayer, I'm supposed to ask God to grant me strength to go out from here to do your bidding. If my problem described on page 45 is lack of power, step 7 is where I get to ask God to give me the power to go forward. And then I get to 8 and 9, and I get to ask God to give me strength to go out and make amends and set right these wrongs. If step 4 is about facing my blocks, step 9 is where I actually get to remove the blocks between me and God. And it was interesting because one of the things that I was really afraid, I thought I'd have to go out and say I'm sorry again to all these people, but in step 9 it actually says that a remorseful sorry, saying we're sorry, won't fit the bill at all. That my real purpose is to put myself in a position where I can be of maximum service to God and the people about me. And I'm supposed to, it's interesting because I thought when I first read step 9, if it's going to injure others in making amends, I thought I was a part of others, but page 79 talks about that I have to face these things no matter what the personal consequences may be. We may lose our position, our reputation, face jail, but we are willing, we must not shrink at anything. That to shrink is to reduce in value. And I was raised in Alcoholics Anonymous to make all my amends. I am currently current on every single amends that I'm constantly aware of. My first inventory that I wrote, I had 488 people on my resentment inventory. From that, I made 355 formal amends, and I wrote 150 some odd letters. And it was interesting because amends wasn't about seeking forgiveness. The amends process was like amending soil. In horticulture, if you have a plot of dead land, what you've got to do is you got to till the soil, add fertilizer, water it, and that process is called amending. What I was trying to do with these relationships was get us back to a point where we could grow from here. And I went out and I make these direct amends, and I started regrowing a lot of my relationships. And step 10 was all about continuing the inventory that I wrote in 4, where it's my moving daily inventory, where I continue to watch for self-dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When it crops up, I ask God to remove it, and it gives me the instructions on what to do with all that. Step 11, I get to do my prayer meditation, where it starts off with doing a nightly review of my day from step 10. I do my own awakenings. Hell, I mean, I could show you them. I got them right here. It's something that I do every single day. And I arrive at step 12, and I've had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. And today I actually have a message to carry. And I got a really good life today. I'm amazed. I'm not one of those people who believes that everything's exactly the way it's supposed to be, because I'm not supposed to be here. I've got this great house, and I've got a great wife, and I've got these 2 wonderful kids. Hopefully my employees will tell you that I'm a great boss, and my friends will tell you that I'm a good friend. And there was a day when the very best I could hope for was to be a criminal who wasn't doing criminal acts. And today, as a direct result of the spiritual awakening, I'm actually I'm a good man. And I owe my life to this program, and I do my very best to carry its message. So with that, Glenn, I will hand it back over to you.